Hello and welcome to Monday's episode of the Terrace Scottish Football Podcast. I am your host Craig Fowler, back once again to look at the action which took place over the Scottish Premiership weekend as we move down to the last two games of the 2024-25 season. Helping me to do it on this occasion, it is Mr. Craig Anderson. Craig, how's it going?
Good. Much better for the weekend having passed and having a bit more relaxation for the remainder of the season, but we'll get on to that.
Yes, we certainly will. And we'll begin with those who had the kind of most to fret about over the last weekend, and that was the teams in the bottom six. So we'll do the three bottom six games. First of all, there's going to be a slight weirdly placing of this Hearts-Motherwell game that even I was at, and even I could barely give a toss about it in second here, but that will make sense, obviously, due to the Derek McInnes factor, which will lead in from talking about one club into leading into another one, even though they weren't playing each other this past weekend. But we will begin with the 6-pointer at the very bottom of the Scottish Premiership, St Johnstone hosting Ross County, and St Johnstone coming out on top by 2-1. Daniel's below this with the opener, Alex Samuel with the equaliser for County, but Elliot Watts, weirdly, I've watched this loads of times, still can't tell if this is a deflection or not, or he just hits it in the ground. Weirdly curled, weirdly spinning finish on the hour mark ended up being enough for all 3 points, with Zach Ashworth being sent off with pretty much the final kick of the game for County. And this means that there is now 2 points between the teams going into the last two games. 3 points between the teams going into the last two games of the season, with St Johnstone now holding a very narrow superior goal difference at this point in time. Minus 27 as opposed to minus 28 for Ross County. Craig, I watched this back a bit earlier. Firstly, I have to go to Don County and I have to go to Ross County because I wrote about them last week, and what I wrote about was the County fans and just County fans being fed up. Cowie himself painting himself into a corner because he's basically set out this team to play only one way this entire season. That's a 3-at-the-back system. He signed for that system. He's never really changed it. The only time he's ever played a back four otherwise was like a way back in August. And now it's no longer working because without Noah Chilvers, without their number 10, without their creative fulcrum, they're struggling to make things happen in the final third. And so I firstly watched the sports scene highlights, and then I even had a look at Y-Scout and checked the formation on there. Both of them had the County formation as a 4-2-3-1. It wasn't really, though. I was just amazed by this, that actually what the formation was, if you're being generous towards Don Cowie and saying that he had changed these ways and had gone away from the 3-at-the-back system, you could say it was a 4-3-2-1, kind of like Christmas tree formation, because that's what they were playing when they didn't have the ball. And they would have George Harman, who was kind of said to be one of the two sitting midfielders in this, the 4-2-3-1 as Sports Scene and Y-Scout had it. He was definitely playing much further to the left than you would normally see somebody play in a defensive midfield too. And when they didn't have the ball, Phillips on the right was dropping back very deep, and you were left with Samuel and Hale in attack. And when they did have possession, Harman would stay quite far on the left, but on the right, Akil Wright would move up into the midfield area and Phillips would go join the attack. So ostensively, when they had the ball, it was a 3-4-3.
No change. I have to say, when Killie played them 2 weeks ago at Rugby Park, I was taken by the fact that lots of players, now I have to say probably Ross County are the team that I've seen the least of this season out of the 12, but I was taken by the fact that almost none of the players seem to be in the positions where I would associate them with being playing, and I felt like that was not a good sign. Because you're talking about Akil Wright, he's got the capabilities to get up and down the pitch, but I think he's much better as a centre half, and yet he was playing not just as a kind of fullback, but as like a wing back, where he was like flying up and down the park. And it therefore doesn't surprise me again that in this game he's been moving about. And I suppose to an extent it's understandable in the sense that they've lost the last 6 games going into this one. He's obviously he doesn't. It's not that he's got a tiny squad, but it's not like you're looking at kind of the guys not playing, and there's loads of options there that are going to like obviously improve it. I know that you've spoken about Greaves and maybe just offering something a bit similar to Chilvers, but he's not the same player. So I can understand them almost maybe trying to just completely jigsaw in a different way with the same pieces, but it doesn't really seem to have worked out for them. And it can't actually, I could have checked, I didn't, like, it can't actually be that common to lose 7 games in a row in this league. Like, you see teams going on winless runs quite a lot, but 7 straight defeats for any team is pretty abysmal, and it's therefore not surprising that has dragged them down towards the bottom. And all it would have taken is St Johnstone to have just picked up slightly more points, and they'd probably be staring down the face of 12th at the moment. Now, that may still happen. I have a sense St Johnstone have maybe just left it a tad too late in that respect, but it all kind of depends. Like, I think there's a decent chance that we'll still be alive going into the final weekend, which I think if you told St Johnstone that in sort of January time, they'd have been biting your hand off for. But yeah, from a county perspective, like, they look bereft at the moment. It's not that they're still obviously scoring some goals. It's not that they're doing nothing, but they just seem to have been lacking identity and lacking what I felt they had for a while, which was that they were quite well structured, quite well organised defensively, all the rest of it. You're now not seeing that.
Yeah, talking about... So there's a few things there to pick up on what you said. I'll start with whether St Johnstone have left it too late, and yeah, they probably still have, because so they need to get... So they've got 2 games left, so 1 win might be enough if County lose both theirs. The problem is that County finish up the season, so they're going away to Dundee, I believe it is, that County are going to next. Even if they lose that, and I mean, Dundee can't exactly be trusted either to keep Waynes out of a close, but say they don't win that, they've still got Motherwell at home on the final day, and Motherwell will have absolutely nothing to play for. And while I don't have much faith at all in County to get a result at this point in time, them fighting for their lives against a Motherwell team that might, already be on holiday, that just kind of seems like a recipe for a likely home win, as poor as County are. And St Johnstone also have to go to Tynecastle, and with the way the Hearts have played, Hearts needed something against Ross County to make sure that they weren't getting sucked in anything. Didn't necessarily need anything against Motherwell, and still with the better team scored 3 goals. And they probably will put a similar performance against St Johnstone, and that will likely be enough to at the very least, to probably win them that game as well. So yeah, in that sense, they probably just have maybe left it a little too late. But I wouldn't be entirely surprised if they still manage to do it just through County losing their last 2 games, or maybe St Johnstone get a point at Tynecastle, and that kind of helping them as well. The other thing you were saying about the terms of changes that Don Cowie could make, because this was the other thing from this game I kind of noticed about County, was that, so the system, I don't think it was too bad. I thought from kind of the highlights that it made it look like St Johnstone were a bit more dominant than they were. County had a bit of possession in St Johnstone's half. They had a bit of the territory. Probably not as good as St Johnstone's carving out chances, and that's why kind of on Sportscene it looked like St Johnstone were a bit more dominant. But it was a fairly even game. St Johnstone started the second half better, got the goal, and then from that point you're chasing the match. Who are you going to bring on to create something, to produce a moment, to find some sort of inspiration to get yourselves back into the game, to get it back to 2 each. And to feel this, they nearly did from a set piece. Roden Hill just offside inside the 6-yard box. But it's just, he's going to his bench, and you look at the people on the bench for County, look at the players, and you've got, hang on, I did write this down. Let me see if I can find it in my notes again. Struggling to do so. There we go, yeah. So he's got a goalkeeper, obviously. 9 subs, a goalkeeper, 5 defenders, a defensive midfielder, a guy who played in the first half of the season in the Highland League, who's apparently a winger, and Jordan White. And that was it. They brought in 3 of those. They brought in White, and they brought on 2 defenders. Dylan Smith, a young defender who could play either right back or centre half, and Elijah Campbell. And that was a double sub they made on 73 minutes, where they brought on pretty much 2 centre halves. And one of the players they brought off was George Harman, who is a defender, but at least he's an attacking player. And it just goes to show, like, just how kind of negatively Don Cowie set up this squad, structured the squad in City's team across a lot of the season, where you've had fullbacks or centre-backs playing in wing-back roles and the midfield being packed with defensive players as well.
And it doesn't help, I think, that this was something I feel we suspected was going to happen. Their goalkeeper has lost form. The goalkeeper that got signed out of the blue, you kind of assumed, he's not played much football. He's coming from these exit trials. He's kind of hanging about. Why are you signing someone? Was it like November they signed him? All of those red flags. And it looked like none of them were in fact red flags. It looked like he was probably a good keeper. And I think probably on the whole he probably still can be. But he started to look a bit less assured. I felt with both the goals, like, it's not that they were egregious goalkeeping mistakes, but both of them kind of you look at and think, ooh, not sure here. Like, there was just elements from both of them that made you question. And I think
the first one's a bit. I would say maybe the second one, because it's not a shot that goes directly into the corner, and it does kind of. It's a bit of a weird one, as I said at the top. That it kind of takes this weird spin and bounce, and I'm still not sure whether it was deflected or not. But again, it's and we'll get to other goals this past weekend that weren't in the corner, where you're thinking a better goalie probably does save that. So the second one I would agree. I think the first one, I think you're a bit harsh. The ball hits the bar as he's already in midair and comes up and kind of hits him as he's trying to stop it from getting over the line. He doesn't really do. He doesn't do very well at clawing it away, but I think it's already gone over the line by that point.
Maybe it just looks messy. I don't know. There's a kind of it has the visuals of a goal from a team who are getting relegated. The sort that they concede. He's probably not the main man at fault when the opposing centre half is getting a bit of space to attack a ball, whatever. But it's to me, it's all come at the wrong time. It's like all the factors that you were a bit worried about with this team have all kind of come home to roost at exactly the time where you didn't want them to.
And as for St Johnstone, so I didn't see the game against, was it Killie that played last week? Is that correct? I didn't see that game. I think from what I could tell, they were pretty listless. Is that right?
Yeah, they were. Considering Killie hadn't won away from home since October, they did not really threaten hugely. They maybe had a wee spell after we went ahead. Like, it didn't. It looked like a team that were kind of resigned to it, and I was quite surprised at that. And I think they got quite a bit of stick at full time from the fans, which hadn't to me been the case since they changed the manager. Like, it felt like there was a bit more togetherness in that, and I feel like a few of them were starting to have their doubts about Valakari, but he's pulled another performance out here, and I think so they live to fight again, and I was quite impressed with them in this game. Like, some individuals, maybe not structurally or anything like that, and the guy that stood out to me is something I did not expect to be saying is Josh McPake.
Yeah.
There is a lot of the Danny Armstrongs about him, watching him in this game. Like, very similar on the other side, right-footed rather than left, but a lot of the ways the positions he picks up, the way he kind of drifts, there's a sort of carefree style to, like, the way he moves his body. His deliveries were really good in this game, and it's an interesting one because, as I said, a guy who you looked at the signing and thought, what on earth are they doing signing him? But if they do go down, you think probably now very, very handy in the Championship. You would assume if he plays the way he has been, not just I think he has kind of come into it a wee bit. And the other guy that kind of stood out in all the right and wrong ways, it's exactly what Ewan was talking about when we did our most likeable players for each team is Big Uche.
Yes.
Just a barrel of laughs as a footballer, but does seem to have had a more or less positive impact on that attack as well.
Yeah, I had that down. So I went to see the St Johnstone Motherwell game the other week, and as I said after the podcast we did on that I felt that St Johnstone were improved in that second half when they brought on Uche and when they brought on Elliot Watt, and I felt the same in this one. Those were the three players I kind of had highlighted in my notes: was McPake, Watt and Uche. Watt in the centre of the park is just the kind of connector for the team. They obviously scored the winning goal as well, but he's just a person who is always demanding the ball, always happy to take it in tight areas or expansive areas and then play it forward, kind of plays with a bit of poise, a bit of purpose. I don't know. St Johnstone fans can maybe tell me more whether when he first came into the team, things, because he obviously was signed in January and he had a bit of pedigree behind him and he kind of looked like he was going to be a good signing, and it hasn't really worked out until recent games. I don't know whether that was just a time of getting himself settled into a new, town, team, whatever, or whether it was the fact that the team just wasn't built to get the best out of him. But he was good in terms of kind of dictating play and, as I say, being that connector for St Johnstone up and down the park. And yeah, Uche, it's great having him back. It's great having him back because he's just so fun to watch because he's a big guy, a big battering ram who doesn't score many goals. So his kind of job is to hold the ball up and flick on and to be a kind of have that gravitational pull for the rest of the attack. That in itself is nothing different. But I can't remember watching many players who'd done that job like Uche Ikpeazu in my entire life. And just the way he moves is so unique. And because he's got like a bit of pace about him as well, but he shouldn't do because his running style is very awkward. I saw a St Johnstone fan say that he runs like a cartoon robot, which I thought was an unusual way of putting it, but might be a bit right. And it's just kind of these straight arms doing this all the time. Sorry, I'm not going to try and describe what I was doing there for those who are only listening on audio, but those who listen those watching on the YouTube will see what I mean. And it's great as well that there's so many moments where you're like, bloody hell, it's hard. He's the type of player that only really stops himself, I think, a lot of the time. And that he gets the ball into him, and you can see him pinning the opposing defenders, and you just know you've got no chance. You've got no chance here. The only way you're winning this is if Uche takes a terrible touch. And half the time, that's exactly what happens. But if he doesn't take a terrible touch and he's able to roll them, then they've just got no chance. And so many times in this game, he just made the ball stick and was a threat that the opposing defenders could not deal with. And that's what he's done ever since saw him kind of pitch up at Hearts. He'll be an interesting one to see what happens if St Johnstone goes down. You'd imagine there's a lot of players in that team with like relegation release clauses. And there's rumours he's one of the highest earner, if not the highest earner at the club. He was basically signed by Levine to be like, you'll be our number 9 and we'll play through you all entire season. And then Uche gets injured last pre-season in his house. There's apparently needed 4 knee operations to fix it. And now he's finally back, not playing under Levine. But I'd love to see Uche in the Championship because he had a decent goal-scoring record at Cambridge before Hearts signed him. And I wonder whether he would score goals at just a lower level. So I want to see Uche in the Championship for a season to see if that is a possibility. Because Uche scoring every second week, it would be quite something to watch.
Yeah, it's that thing. I felt like he got injured almost before. I felt like it was announced he'd signed for St Johnstone, and then it was like the next story you read was about 30 seconds later was that he was out for months, and you kind of thought you'd never see him. But yeah, it's one of these things. Of course, he could end up being the hero because he could score. All it takes is probably a couple of goals between now and the end of the season, and all of a sudden he's the guy that's kept them up. And
if they win 1-0 at Tynecastle and he scored the goal, then yeah.
But yeah, it's just a bit like I saw a post earlier that the team that started on the opening day of the season for St Johnstone, I think only one of them started this game.
That's incredible.
Which is, I think it was Sidibe. But it must be Sidibe actually. It was either him or Hope. I can't remember which of the two it was now. But because you're looking at the team, like most of them weren't there.
Yeah.
So I think it points to the turnover. I think Levine takes a lot of the blame in terms of the squad building because the squad was poor. I think the budget obviously wasn't there either, so there is an aspect of that. I then think it's like doubling down on that because you're bringing in a manager who probably gets less out of Levine's players than Levine would have done himself for that period, and he's managed to bring in one or two interesting ones. But I think Valakari's failed quite badly as well in the sense that they looked like they pulled it all together and then they've just had a bit of a collapse. So if they do go down, I think pretty much everyone can have the finger pointed at them. But I kind of expected them to win this game, and it's much more interesting that they've kind of given themselves a bit of hope. As I say, they probably go to Tynecastle and lose, but you never know at this point in the season, and it will. I think a lot of their fate is down to County. I did find it quite interesting that it really looked to me like they were trying to score another goal at the end, like rather than just defending the lead. Like they had those wee breaks and the ball wasn't being taken to the corner. It was like for example, the shot from like 75 yards, which was absolutely atrocious, but not so much that one.
And then Mackenzie Kirk did it as well. I didn't know whether that was what they were told in terms of trying to improve the goal difference, or whether that was just two very not very inexperienced, because I mean Sidibe's played now at this level for a year, and so has Kirk. But this is their first. Like Sidibe only joined last January. They're both of them only like 12 months or so at this kind of level of football. Was it just naivety? Was that actually what they were asked to do?
It's hard. I just found it interesting because probably if they win a game, if they get the number of points that allows them to catch Ross County, they'll probably have a better goal difference anyway, because that would require them to win a game and County to lose two, or them to win two and County to lose one. But obviously there is Dundee that are 5 goals worse off ahead. So it's kind of like that. It's an interesting situation where you're like, was that the right thing to do or not? The Kirk one, he actually probably nearly scores. It's Sidibe, even though he's a lot further out, it's probably a better chance. Like it's an empty net. Now he's a very, very long way away, but it was such a pathetic effort. It was like comical. But I enjoy this stage of the season where goalkeepers come up, because it happened at Rugby Park as well. It's just there's just a bit of chaos brought to proceedings.
It's always good fun. Right, let's move on to our second game. And like I said, this one does not need talked about a lot in terms of the actual match. Hearts 3, Motherwell 0. Hearts goal scorers, Lord Shankland with a double, and then Alan Forrest rounded off the scoring in midway through the second half. Motherwell did have a goal disallowed at what would have made it one each not long before half-time. Callum Slattery with a good finish, but it was disallowed for Casey, Dan Casey. I was like, my head, I couldn't remember his first name for a second there. I was like, Sean Casey. I was like, that's not his name. Dan Casey, kind of going in front of the goalkeeper sight line. I think you would probably agree with this in that I don't think it impacted Ryan Fulton's dive whatsoever, but under the laws, it's a fair enough decision.
Yeah, I thought, I agreed with you 100% that I don't think Ryan, especially with it being Ryan Fulton, I don't think it's being saved. But he is like slap bang between him and the ball. It's like it's not, and it's not like he is trying to get out of the way, but by trying to get out of the way, he's like a much more massive distraction to the goalkeeper. So it's kind of one of those. It's a bit annoying, but I would happily always see those goals ruled out for a player in that position. I feel like it's actually the opposite. I actually think not enough goals get ruled out for offside players, like doing things that affect goalkeepers. Because I think like even just the movement of a person on your eye line is enough to kind of distract you a bit. But yeah, in that case, it was a shame because it wasn't a shame because it was Callum Slattery, but it was a very nice finish.
I'm sure as somebody that's not a big fan of Callum Slattery, I'm sure you would have enjoyed it as well, that he was kind of giving it the finger, the hand to the ear celebration, and then it's chopped off.
So it was quite a bit of odd VAR celebrations and non-celebrations this weekend, but yeah, it felt like Hearts kind of this is what was always going to happen. Like I think I said, it felt like they were either going to get like 0 or 15 points after the split. That maybe not quite managed that, but you know what I mean. It was like I was going to say that can't help it. We got beat by Dundee. No, but you know what I mean. It felt like it was one of these situations where either the season was going to completely fall apart, or they were just going to like just based on the quality of the players, kind of get better, and that's kind of what happened.
I never thought the season was going to fall apart. I never thought we were in any real danger of going down, and one reason for that was the Motherwell game at Fir Park. Hearts were dreadful, like such a Like a performance lacking in spirit when you needed to win to get into the top six, and yet Hearts were still the better team, and if anybody was going to win that game, it was going to be Hearts. So it was like, well, getting Motherwell at Tynecastle, I only needed one victory after the split. Getting Motherwell at Tynecastle, getting St Johnstone at Tynecastle, there was just, even the Dundee game, obviously it didn't turn out right, but kind of thought, well, Dundee shipped goals left, right and centre, that should be, and Hearts, I mean, look back at that Dundee game, Hearts should have won it. Like, Hearts had the chances to win the game, but done their usual, missed chances at the wrong moments, conceded a crap goal, and then kind of shut themselves from that point forward. But I just thought this squad was still too strong because people say, well, it happened to Hibs back in the day, but that Hibs squad was a fucking joke. Like, this Hearts team would wipe the floor with that team. So it was always a case that I just never really saw it coming. And this was kind of the typical post-split game I envisioned, where I don't think there was a 3-0 probably flatters Hearts a bit in this one. Motherwell were, because it wasn't exactly like one-way traffic all the time. Motherwell built play up reasonably well at points, but they just didn't really have much in attack. And it says a lot for A, the kind of injury problems they've had, but they have signed a few players that have had history of injury issues. And B, that then leads me on to talk about the squad building, because Motherwell have signed so many players this season, and yet to start a game with Dom Thompson as your left midfielder, wow.
They are. It does feel a little bit like there are three teams now that are kind of just coasting to the end of the season, and it felt like one of these afternoons where just get 11 guys out on the park, get the game done with, and come back. It feels a little bit like that with Wimmer. It was like, make sure we stay up, and I was going to say have a bit of a clear out, but they've since given like Stephen O'Donnell, Paul McGinn new contracts. Like, I'm not necessarily that's a bad thing. If you're a foreign manager coming in, maybe you want to retain a bit of the experience core that knows the league and all that. So it's not that I'm critical of that, but it's just
popular guys in the dressing room, stuff like that.
But it feels like quite a lot of the players that were in that game are probably not the ones who he'll be working with next season. I'm quite interested to see how that goes. But yeah, it felt a little bit like you saw the shortcomings of the squad building with Kettlewell, that it felt a bit. It felt like he just signed like 20 strikers and didn't really bother with the rest of the team, is exactly what it felt like. But which again is covered by the fact that they're playing like O'Donnell at centre half, Seddon's kind of stepping in centrally at times. It's like, that's not these players.
And O'Donnell can play on the right of a three, but like to play in the middle of a flat back four, you saw it at the opening goal. Like, just kind of, it's a mistake you wouldn't expect a player with his experience to make. But if you're playing in a position that you've never really played in before, then you're more likely to make them.
Yeah, the only attribute I think Stephen O'Donnell has for being able to play centre half is that he's tall and he's quite good in there. Like, I don't think I've never felt him he was that defensively sound as a defender, but as I said, they won't care to an extent, because it's just like, turn up, play the game, back home. And for Hearts, I think the interesting thing is the Shanklin situation now, because it's while we talk, I think I heard you talk about it. It's not as simple as putting him back at centre forward and he's suddenly scoring every week. It is typical that he ends up with back-to-back doubles, and almost to the point where he's almost getting to the stage where if he gets a couple more goals, when you just look back at the numbers for this season, you're like, that was an alright season. I don't know what we're bothered about. He scored 11 goals or whatever you end up saying, but it's kind of, it's very in this the stat padding type situation.
Yeah, I've seen Hearts fans basically make it very simple in terms of like, oh, you play him as a number 9, you play him at the top of the attack, he scores goals, and that was what was Critchley doing, not do it. I've seen Hearts fans say it, I've seen members of the media say it, and yeah, you're right. It is nowhere near as simple as that, because yeah, Critchley had Shanklin largely playing in deeper roles, but that's not something new, is it? He's been pretty much playing in deeper positions since the second half of his first season. First it was Josh Ginnelly, and then for a lot of points last season, it was Kenneth Vargas. Yes, he did have points where he was playing up top, but a lot of his goal record came when he was playing alongside Vargas, and Vargas was a guy that would go long and he would come short. The reason why he was scoring so many goals last season is that his finishing was out of this world. And it seemed like anywhere inside 20, 25 yards, if he got a free-sighted goal, the ball was going on target or it was going in the back of the net. And he came into this campaign, wasn't able to carry that form forward. I think it maybe got in his head a little bit about not getting the move, and then he started off the season poor in front of goal, and then it just snowballed for there. And if Shankland's not scoring goals as the number 9, then because he's not he works hard from the front, but because he's not quick at all, and because he's not really that big, and that's what I said as well, I thought he was better last season when I thought he was a bit fatter, because he did have a bit more physical presence about him. But without that, you're limited in what he's bringing to the team if he's not putting the ball in the back of the net, even though he does link play well. But then, because you're thinking he links play well, you're like, well, if he's not scoring, let's drop him back. And then you drop him back, and then it takes him further away for goal, so then he gets less opportunities, so then he can't score his way out of this funk, and then it kind of snowballs. So there maybe should have been, I don't think it's necessarily Critchley's kind of fault, because it's been the case for a couple of seasons that Shankland has played deeper, but with the other managers, you would see it with Nielsen, you would see it with Naismith, they would kind of rotate it, and that it wouldn't be every single game that Shankland was playing in a deeper role. He would still have matches where they would change the system around him, change the players around him, and then he'd go to the top, and it would kind of go between the two. And that's maybe what Critchley should have thought of doing earlier on, was to put Shankland at the point, as opposed to. But at the same time, like, and you look at the team, this is something I wanted to talk about, but I'll just briefly mention it because I want to get on to talk about McInnes before we move on to the Killie game. Is that it looks like, you look at the Hearts team and like Liam Fox has gone back to basics, because it's like all the guys in January have been bombed out. And it's easy to say like, oh, well, that shows they weren't any good, blah, blah. But no, because without Elton Kabangu, without Steinwinder and Jamie McCart coming in January, Hearts would have been in serious relegation bother, because that was at a time where the squad desperately needed somebody to come in and create a spark, and they were able to do that, particularly Kabangu, who has been in bad form recently, but his goals between January and February was kind of what lifted the team out of the mire. It's just a case that they're in bad form now, and if you've got a big squad like Hearts, you may as well use it and bring in these other guys who, all of them played well, Halkett, Kent and Shankland.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate that the downturn in form came a little bit too early for the other clubs. So you want the down, for a big club to go down, you want the downturn in form to start almost immediately after the window closes, and they haven't quite realised the trouble they're in, because that's the Hearts are able to. I don't mean like spend their way out of trouble makes it sound like more serious, but you know what I mean. They were able to turn over the squad, as you said, at that point, and just improve it enough and get it done. And I think you're right. Even with Critchley in charge, they would likely have won a game.
Yeah, aye. The Critchley sack, it was just because just in case. Just in case the players were ready to turn, just in case there was going to be a mutiny, just in case, like, okay, if we're not going to keep him on anyway, may as well get rid of him now and just bring in the steady pair of hands and Liam Fox to see us over the line. But anyway, it seems like Hearts are going to, well, maybe do you know what? I think with most people, you would say Hearts are going to have a new manager. However, I think with this particular manager, that is far from a cast iron thing, because Derek McInnes is the number one contender. Hearts want him. Hearts are looking to speak to Killie over bringing in Derek McInnes as a manager, but we've seen it before when he was at Aberdeen. Derek McInnes does turn down situations if he doesn't think they're right for them. He's not just a kind of blind optimist and is desperately, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't mind. My brain's not entirely working today, but he's not somebody that's like, yes, I could definitely do that regardless of the scenario. He wants to go in and he wants things to be his way, which might not be the case at Tynecastle. He might have to adapt. And depending on how those talks go, will depend on whether Derek McInnes does become Hearts manager. Now, if it happens, I assume I will be talking about it later in the week with somebody of a Hearts persuasion. But Craig, for the meantime, what is your Killie hat take on Derek McInnes potentially becoming Hearts manager?
I think it's interesting, because I think you're right. Not only does he kind of sometimes say no, he does string the situations out as well. And I think, to be honest, I don't blame him, but I feel like it's always like, if I am going to say no to this job, I might as well get something out of it leverage-wise, and it's hard to know whether he's in that boat where he's kind of making people think he's going to take it even if he's not. Or I do think he probably will take it this time, just on the basis that, if he had a few bad months at Killie, there would be a lot of pressure. It's not like he's in this. If it was last summer, where you're like he was riding the absolute crest of a wave, it would have been a lot more challenging to convince him, I think. I feel like he knows that there is a lot more he can do at Killie, but at the same time, it's a chance to get in at one of the bigger clubs again. So from that point of view of that, it's interesting. From a Killie perspective, I think it's quite interesting because, yeah, to me, I am the only time, 2 times I would say I've been really gutted when a manager's left Killie was Steve Clarke, obviously, and then Kenny Shields, and that was for a kind of different reason, which was it was just a much more, he was a very likeable character. The league performances were okay, but nothing more than that. He won a cup, but he was kind of just a very likeable character at a time where the club felt in quite a bad place, and he was the kind of thing holding it together. With McInnes, it would be more like when Mixu Patalainen left, or when Bobby Williamson left, where it was like a popular manager and you would rather they stay because you're probably going to be better with them than without them. But they are they're not, it's not someone where you're like, oh man, what's going to happen next? They're not irreplaceable, if that makes sense. And it's like, I am a big fan of McInnes. I always have been, and I'd be much happier if he continues to be our manager. I feel Killie underperformed this season, but we're probably only 5-10% off having another pretty good season, just like the wee bits and pieces.
There's seasons that teams have when they're really poor, and you kind of look at the manager and you point the finger of blame and say this is on you. And I think a lot of the season is probably on Derek McInnes as well. He said himself that he should have
turned the squad over.
He banked too much on last season's team replicating their form now, but at the same time, I think it's kind of hard almost to blame him too much for that, as basically saying that's a dreadful mistake. How could you make that? Because everybody, Killie fans included, thought coming into this season that Killie were going to have a really strong campaign because they kept that team together.
And it's not like a super old squad. Okay, maybe an attack with Vassell and Watkins, but apart from that, it's like they're still mostly the right side of 30. It's not like, the creaking old guard and trying to get another year out of them.
Yeah, and I think there's been a few things that are kind of out with his control that have gone against him. Europe slowed the team down early in the season. You just never really got any momentum started because of that. And Europe went into then having all the disciplinary problems, which he did ultimately fix, because I don't think he had a player sent off in 2025. But it was obviously an issue earlier in the campaign, and it was often for a lot of experienced players. And so it's like, when a squad has bad discipline, you obviously can look at the manager and say, well, you should be doing something about this. You should be, setting some sort of standards to make sure this doesn't happen in the first place. But it just seemed like these errors were just kind of popping in a bit more early in the campaign that you just wouldn't expect. And yeah, and also as well, like you say, he maybe gambled too much on Watkins and Vassell doing it again, given their age. But also to have quite the drop-off from those positions that you had last season isn't necessarily something that we just saw coming either. So not been a great season for McInnes, but it's not one of those bad seasons that I think should make you think he's not a good manager.
Well, and the thing for me was, as people have listened to the podcast, I don't think I was really ever that worried about relegation. I would say with the only
you kept thinking we were going to finish top 6 up until the point when it was mathematically impossible.
We were only, we ultimately were only 6 points off it at the end, despite all the things you spoke about, and it probably would have just taken 1 or 2 results the other way. The only time I kind of worried was that St Mirren game, when we got absolutely battered by them. And they hadn't really, we'll get onto them now, and they are firing on all cylinders, and maybe that kick-started it, but it's not like they had been flying along at that point. They were kind of battling not that far different from us in the table. And then you're a bit like, oh, this is not looking good. But fair play, since then they've won 4 games out of 5. So it does show, and it's been the one thing with him as the manager, you've always got the reaction when the result hasn't been there. And I have no doubt that the squad is kind of playing for him and all the rest of it. You don't think you ever doubt that. I think the thing that always strikes me with McInnes is there are guys where he's at clubs where these previous clubs, Bruce Anderson, Marley Watkins being amongst them, where the fans of those clubs have been a bit critical of him not using those players enough, and yet they want to sign for him again.
Yeah.
And I think it says a lot that he's he's obviously popular. Greg Stewart multiple times. He was back again last year, but it says something about he obviously is someone that they like playing with and all the rest of it. So from that point of view, I think he's not irreplaceable, but I would much rather keep him. And I think he's probably been able to get fans back on side with that run of form. I think you had the guy on from one of the podcasts after that St Mirren game, and I think he said majority of the support wanted him gone at that point. I didn't get the impression that was the case. Maybe the majority of the forum did, but I made the mistake of dropping on there the other day. I don't really post on it much, and I made the mistake of kind of having a wee look in to see if anyone had any insight, which like inside knowledge, which not really. And I was reminded of why I don't, because I think it's just quite. It's a very small number of people making posts, if you know what I mean, and some good ones, but it's kind of wading through. But I got the impression from people in the stand that there was frustration, but there's frustration in the same way that you're frustrated with a manager. Like, you got it under Jim Jeffries until the end. I don't think people really wanted rid of him. It was probably only in that last year. It was just like, this guy's a bit annoying. And I think he's maybe in that category at the moment where it's like, and Jim Jeffries was Killie manager for the best part of a decade, I think. So it's like, it feels like he could have longevity if he wants it. But at the same time, he may just see the chance to earn more money, raise his profile, bigger club, and I can't blame him for that. I just hope if that is the case, it's kind of done quite quickly, because we are starting to try and put a squad together, I suppose. Yeah. Like there is going to be a wee bit of turnover. Like you spoke about, Robbie D signed a new contract today, which is good news, but you've got Joe Wright. Don't know what's happening with Danny Armstrong, but there's been a bit more chat that he might be a bit more amenable to staying again, on the basis that he probably has a lot less interest than he would have done if he'd had a good season, and a few others that are kind of kicking about out of contract. It'd be good to know what's happening there. So you don't want this to drag on too long.
Speaking of dragging on too long, we should probably get to our third game.
Sorry. Yeah, we should. Fortunately, there's not loads to talk about in the top six apart from one game. So
yeah, that's true. So yeah, we'll get to our final bottom six game, and that was Derek McInnes' Killie, making sure that they survive in the Scottish Premiership for another season with a 3-2 victory over Dundee. Danny Armstrong got the scoring started from the penalty spot. Dundee equalised, and this quite the last 15 minutes plus injury time of this game. Dundee equalised in 76 minutes through Lyle Cameron, but just a minute later, Bruce Anderson, who'd missed a glorious chance earlier in the game, put Killie back in front. Killie then seemed to have made sure of the points with Robbie Dees getting a goal just into stoppage time, but Cameron struck again for Dundee, setting up a nervy finish, but Killie were able to see it over the line. Craig, this is the game where I didn't write extensive notes about, didn't do much research on. I watched the highlights, but that's about it. Tell me all about it.
I think the first thing to say is I think the scoreline massively flattered Dundee in terms of how the game went. Not so much the first half. The first half was, I would say, fairly even, but Killie maybe edged and got the goal from a penalty. Obviously, you saw the absolute sitter from Bruce Anderson at the game. We thought it was a brilliant wee bit of football and such a good run from Ndaba, who's been really flying the last few weeks. And at the time, we all thought he should have just hit it instead of the pass, and we thought maybe Anderson was caught out by that. But when you watch it back, he was absolutely right to pass it, and it's an absolute sitter from Anderson to miss that.
And Anderson's right in his reaction in that the pass wasn't great and could have been better. However, he's got all the time. He could take a touch, yeah. He could take a touch, and that's the thing. That's the difference. Like the best players would take a touch, would be able to pivot in that situation, not just expect like, okay, I'm waiting for this to come onto my foot and I'm going to sweep it home like this. Once things change, go, right, I've still got the time, take a touch, pick your spot.
But after that, like it was quite attritional. There wasn't necessarily loads of chances created. Killie get the goal. It's obviously a set piece from a set piece, which is kind of what you come to expect, because it's a free kick and then Donnelly's pulled down. It's a really stupid thing to do, because I think Donnelly is getting to the ball, but what's he going to do?
Yeah, for that angle,
it's very high. He's not going to score from there, and it's even quite tough to get it back across the goal usefully. brilliant penalty, very emphatic. I think Anderson's penalty, Armstrong's penalty last week, although it went in, was a wee bit unconvincing, but that one was a lot more convincing. But after half time, the 15 minutes, like, I think Killie could have scored about 4 goals in that 15 minutes after half time. It was relentless, and Dundee were so disorganised, fell apart constantly. Every time, basically, it was Fraser Murray most of the time getting the ball running at them down the left. They had no answer to it. It was like kind of an onslaught, and we didn't score, and then they kind of came back into a wee bit, but we still had quite a few chances, and Daba missed one. Finlay misses a pretty good chance. There was several like that, and then of course they go up the other end and score an absolute calamity of a goal. When you watch it back, it's like, I talked about the goal St Johnstone conceded being the sort of thing that a team that gets relegated concedes. So was that. Donnelly's like poised, like kind of dwelling on the ball, kind of falls over. Watson looks like he's coming back, but almost feels a bit hesitant to make the challenge in case he gives away a penalty. O'Hara's coming, I don't blame him for this goal, but O'Hara's coming out. And I don't know if Watson, I still couldn't quite work out if Watson like tackles the ball onto Cameron and that's how it ends up in the net or whatever, but it was one of those kind of classic, and you're watching it trickling over the line and worrying, wondering if the tackle's going to come back in. And I felt that was entirely undeserved for Dundee at that point. We should obviously mention the weird VAR situation before that.
Yeah.
So the challenge came, so literally, because they said it was Kyle Vittel just kind of on the park, literally just on the park, as in brought on, jogged all the way over to defend that set piece. The ball gets swung over, and the first involvement is to have some, I would say, very minor contact with Murray. I thought Murray was offside. I think it sounds like he wasn't, so I wasn't ever that worried. And I think it's minor contact. I would be quite, I could understand the penalty being given because one's been given up, not the other end, up the same end, but I didn't ever think it was, so I wasn't that worried. And then it was quite a strange situation because O'Hara had the ball at his feet and was kind of standing with the ball, basically waiting for Dundee to close him down. It was a hot day, so I think the players were kind of having some breathers during the game, if that makes sense. So O'Hara had the ball, and basically, because I think play maybe flowed on for about 30 seconds, and O'Hara had the ball, and then the referee stopped the game to do the VAR signal. But it was like, obviously O'Hara was like, there was nothing happening, so it made sense, even though it wasn't out of play. But it was also the time for the drinks break. And I kind of was like, is he just like also just doing the drinks break now? And then he went over and he was standing there for ages. And I couldn't tell if he'd made his decision, but he was just letting the players finish the drink break, or if he was waiting for something. It was quite odd. And then there was obviously the rumour that the VAR wasn't working. It doesn't sound like that was the case. It sounds like they thought it was a foul, called him over, and then kind of double checked and went, oh, actually, this isn't in the box.
But I thought that was weird because it very much looked like the contact continues inside the box.
I thought they made a decent fist of describing it on Sportscene, which is like, because it wasn't a pull, it was like a push. It's like,
yeah, okay.
It's less like, if you're still holding into the box versus you're pushing, it's like a one-off contact. But
yeah. There could be some contact residue almost, but that's not the force that's committed the foul.
Yeah, I found that quite interesting, but it was quite a weird situation, and he didn't give it. I thought Don Robertson had a really good game. I think you can tell at the moment the referees have got a good bit of experience in the Premiership, that they're not just like running about flashing cards and giving fouls all the time, which feels quite common at the moment with the sort of newer refs, which is probably natural. But you're talking that it was very against the run of, or against the run of play of the goal, or at least against like the way the game had gone. But obviously Killie immediately go up the other end and make it 2-1. The touch from Fraser Murray as that ball comes over, like to drag that out of the air, is superb. Like he brings it out. Obviously then there's a bit of pinball with him and Donnelly. Donnelly puts the cross in, atones for it, and it's another header from Bruce Anderson. He scores a lot of headers for a small player, I would say. And then, as you said, Dees gets the goal, which is very badly defended, I would say, from the set piece. And then Killie kind of panicked a bit, I would say, because it felt, the game was completely killed off. There was to me, there was no chance Dundee were ever getting back into it, and then all of a sudden they get the goal. And I have to say, you called it nervy, and I'm sure it was for the players, but by that time the other result had came in, and I kind of knew it didn't matter. A draw would have been fine as well. Right. So I was like, who cares? I would rather we win the game, but it's not like a devastating one. But it is just like that fixture is just chaotic. Like since they came back up, we had a 2-2 draw where Dundee equalised in the last minute last season. We had a 2-2 draw where at Rugby Park where Killie were 1-0 down with 5 minutes to go, went 2-1 up with the second goal coming in stoppage time and managed to draw 2 each. And then we had the game in the Scottish Cup where we scored twice in the first 3 minutes. Then we had a 2-2 draw where we scored in the last minute. And then this season we had the 3-2 win for Killie at Dens where we scored 3 goals in the last 5 minutes. And then Dundee came from 2-0 down to beat us in the other game at Dens where their winner was in the last minute. So it's just been a complete nonsense of a fixture for whatever reason from two managers, or from McInnes anyway, who you would kind of say is or would be perceived as a defensive manager, and obviously Docherty's record would imply that he's not a defensive manager, but you'd kind of think of him in that mould. But Dundee were a mess defensively throughout the game. I thought the only thing which I think will keep their heads above water is that they do look fairly dangerous when they get up the park.
Yeah.
Because they were very, very poor. I think you saw the XG for Killie was nearly 4 in this game, which is wildly high.
Yeah, it's quite something for like not Celtic or Rangers to do in a game. For Celtic this season.
So like I would struggle to give analysis on any individual players because of the type of game it was, but just to say, from a Dundee perspective, Lyle Cameron scored 2 goals, but I think probably that was all he did. And that seems to be a bit of a trait. Like they were kind of critical of that. Murray, it must be very frustrating for him. How he's managing to score so many goals in this team, I'm not quite sure, because they don't really seem to create chances for him. He's like doing a lot of it himself, but very well, because he's just a thorn in the side. But yeah, I think Dundee will get a win, and a win will probably be enough. But they are very, very disorganised as a team.
Right, let's move on to the first of our top 6 games, and that took place at Tannadice on Saturday, and that was won by the visitors St Mirren by 2-0 over Dundee United. Goals in each half from Mikael Mandron and Jonah Anyunga, enough for Stephen Robinson's men, and it means that with 2 games to go in the season, St Mirren are very much in the hunt for Europe. Kind of similar to St Johnstone, don't know if they've left it just a little bit too late, because they play Hibs at home in midweek, and a victory for Hibs will secure European football for them. So obviously they'll be going all out to try and get the 3 points. And then the last game of the season will be away to Celtic Park on Trophy Day. Yes, Celtic have nothing to play for, but we've seen them kind of go 2 ways in the past. I remember one time they were beaten by Aberdeen, which enabled Aberdeen to clinch second, but also there was a time on Trophy Day where they beat Motherwell 7-0.
Allowed Aberdeen to clinch second ahead of Rangers. You should mention.
Right, so there was added incentive for Celtic to do fuck all in that game, and that's not going to be it this time. So you would think that's going to be 3 points for the champions at Celtic Park. So their chance to do it will come in midweek, but that's not going to be an easy game either. Yeah. And sorry, you go for it.
No, I was just going to say, because I think I was on the podcast when St Mirren sealed top 6, and I kind of said, brilliant achievement for them. They can probably, the season's probably done now. They can probably, enjoy the last few games, put their feet up. But they haven't. They've been fantastic since the split. This is their 3rd season in the top 6, and they've had more points in these 3 games than they have in the previous 10 top 6 games they've ever played, which says a lot. Obviously getting the draw with Rangers and then the 2 wins that they've got, and the nature of this one, which was, it wasn't like full one way football. Like they did have, Dundee United did have some chances, but I thought they thoroughly deserved the win, and as obviously it could have been 3 at the end, and they had other chances apart from the disallowed goal. So they've done this to teams quite a lot. They are very good at seeing out the pressure and then grabbing a goal and then grabbing another one and getting big. They've had quite a lot of multiple goal away wins against like quote unquote bigger teams, and it seems to be a bit of a Robinson specialty.
It's funny, it's two teams that will finish the campaign on kind of, regardless of what happens over the next couple of days, they finish the campaign kind of very similar records over the course of the season, but teams that have done it in kind of different ways in terms of the fact that United obviously had the strong start, which then got stronger, and ever since the turn of the year, they've just kind of really tried to hold it together and not let it fall apart at the seams, whereas St Mirren have, early in the campaign, had their problems, obviously, that have been well documented. Europe as well, I think, threw them off a bit early in the season. And then they've kind of got it together as the campaign has gone along, and they're kind of finishing the stronger of the two. And I think it's interesting as well, because I was looking about this when I was going to make the kind of point about Dundee United, and that both of these teams, St Mirren and Dundee United, at this point in time, at least in the season, I've not done a full check in terms of how many games different players have played for them. But in terms of their squad, players with first team experience in their squads at this point in time, United and St Mirren is 1 and 2 for the least number of players. And I'd like to use that to give more credence to my theory that the Scottish Premiership would be better if we had limits on how big squads should be. And I think both these teams have overachieved this season, in part due to the fact that they have smaller squads, can invest their money in the better areas. Can invest their money in better players rather than just bloating it out with a bunch of jobbers. And it's easier to have a bit of squad harmony and a bit of understanding in your team as well.
The only counterpoint to that is that I did see something the other day saying Killie had used the least players this season in the Premiership, so it doesn't always work. Doesn't always work. but
that does not suit my narrative, Craig. So I'm just going to pretend that's not true.
The player that stood out for me, I only saw the highlights of this game, but kind of reading and chatting to a couple of people was Ryan Alabiosu, who started like a house on fire at Rugby Park as well, and then it kind of faded away. But he has been very good in recent weeks, and just I think I spoke about the fact having a proper wing back, but he's been more than that. He's one of these wing backs that pops up everywhere, and I felt he was kind of constantly getting them up the park and also kind of involved in a lot of chances, openings, opportunities that they had. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with him. I imagine he'll be one they'll be keen to keep, because he's on loan, I think, at the moment. But and then the front two, they're kind of getting a bit more of a tune out of a Younger, which is good to see. A player I like watching. And Mandron's hit a bit of form as well. I think it's 7 in his last 10 or 11 games or something.
Both of them were very good. You're right, Alabiosu was excellent as well. Declan John, kind of good providing on the other side. And I thought the midfield played really well. So Mark O'Hara was out for this one. So Roland Aduwu, who is, I think normally when he's been used this season, it's been kind of brought on as like a wide attacker. And when at the points where they've played like a 3-4-3, but he was just put in the midfield just in place of O'Hara. And it was just a nice complement of players. Like Phillips was the one kind of doing the kind of providing the verticality of like going beyond the forwards and going to not going beyond the forwards in terms of a kind of goal scoring box to box way, but more in terms of he was on the right of the midfield three, so he would kind of go beyond in terms of providing an option down that channel. So the kind of the ball that he would used to do for Olasanya, where they would kind of chip it into that area, and he would either pick it up or you'd be forcing the opposing team to defend it beside their own corner flag, and that would usually end up with you getting possession either back within 30, 40 yards of goal or knocking it out for a throw in and then setting up from there. So he was doing that. Aduwu was providing the energy in the middle, so he was picking up a lot of the second balls, and you could see him like kind of bursting forward at times, as you saw with the goal. And also then there's Boyd Muntz as well to provide the guile. So it all worked very nicely in the middle of the park. What to say about United before we move on? I think it worked. I think what helped it work so well for St Mirren was the fact that I agree with, I think Tony said it on last week's podcast, Dundee United are just really looking a bit leggy at this point in time. And
that's a small squad for you, Craig.
Yeah, well, but the thing is, Craig, we wouldn't have that problem if everybody had the same size squad. You see, so that's not a reason for this not to work. is what I'm saying. But anyway, I think we can see that they're leggy. Two things for this game. One is that you're right in that over the 90 minutes, Mirren definitely deserved their victory. But up until it went 2-0, I felt this was a fairly even contest. And the big difference was that St Mirren had some excellent finishing, helped a little bit by some dodgy goalkeeping. I thought Walton was poor for that first one, and Adebayorega is certainly poor for the second goal. And Dundee United didn't have good finishing at their end. Docherty had a chance. It was a good save by the keeper, but there was ones where Dalby had a header, which he should have done better at. There was another couple as well where they could have done better in the final third. And had they got those goals, this game might have been a bit different. But it was quite an entertaining game of the kind of game going back and forth. And I think that also showed that Dundee United were a bit leggy because United have kind of wanted to stay compact, but because they're at home, they also want to provide a threat on the break. And they've managed to, not necessarily on the break, but wanted to provide a threat in the final third. And in order to do that, to stay compact and to provide a threat, your midfielders need to do a lot of work getting up and down. And this game just felt quite ragged and quite stretched and quite open just for the very start. And and I think the midfield got the better of that area, and that said to me that United were running on fumes a little bit. And the other aspect of it is, once they went 2-0 down, they'd done nothing. And it could have been 3 or 4, maybe even 5 by the end. So Mirren just kept going at it, and United, and it's just the case that, one, they're not in great form, so their confidence is down, and that's always going to affect you trying to get back into a match. But also, when you are really feeling it, and your legs just aren't quite there, when the game's in the balance, you've got something there, you've got something tangible to reach for, then you can go that extra 5-10%. That's harder to do when you're 2-0 down and playing a team that's playing well. Right, let's move on to our final two games, and we'll start with the match that took place at Celtic Park. Celtic defeating Hibs by 3-1. Hibs opened the scoring in this one through Martin Boyle, but Celtic were leading by half-time with Nicholas Kuhn and Adam Ida on the score sheet, and then Rio Hatate made sure of the points in the second half. And Craig, I think it was absolutely obvious that after, on last week's podcast, when Tony Anderson ripped into Adam Ida, not necessarily saying anything to disagree with, but he ripped into Adam Ida, and part of it was saying that Adam Ida doesn't score goals in important points in matches, and Adam Ida scored a goal at a very important point in this match.
I chuckled when that came through on my phone at halftime before that game, during that game. It felt for one of those, like, Hibs had a lot of chances in this game, far more chances than you would normally expect to get at Celtic Park. I laughed at the highlights where I think Boyle had his first chance he didn't score, which I think he would have been offside for anyway. And then the commentator said something like, "Oh, you've got to take those chances. They don't come very often at Celtic Park or whatever." And then the next highlight is him scoring anyway. And then they obviously had another really good chance right before that. He did a goal like 30 seconds before it. And maybe the game goes a bit differently, but you also saw an interesting side of Celtic in the Kuhn goal with how they attacked when Hibs played the high line. I thought that was really interesting, where they had 3 players almost kind of coming back and arcing their runs. And how do you deal with that? Because Celtic have struggled a wee bit with teams that have pressed them high up, but it does feel a wee bit like they're kind of starting to adapt to it there.
Yeah.
And that's obviously worrying, because you're kind of desperately trying to find the Achilles heel for a team like this, and if there's no Achilles heel there, it becomes a lot trickier.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So Hibs, having watched Hearts at Tynecastle a couple of months ago, it was a similar type of game plan, just not as aggressive. Hearts were very much kind of camped out almost at Celtic's penalty box, and it looked great in the opening bit to that match until Celtic got into the other half, and then all of a sudden there was 40 yards of free space to run in towards the goal. So it wasn't quite like that. It was a lot like, but they still did press high, and they still had to have their defence high. And yeah, Hibs, it did well in terms of Hibs having chances at the other end, more chances you would probably have at Celtic Park. But the highlights made the first half seem a bit more even than it was. Celtic had more opportunities playing those through balls in behind the Hibs backline. It was happening constantly, and it just wasn't. It wasn't a defensive attacking game plan. Yep, fine. From a defensive point of view, it just wasn't sustainable, and they were always going to concede goals. You could watch it maybe if you watch the highlights as well and think, God, if it only held it to half time, because it cuts from Boyle's goal right to Kuhn's one. But there was opportunities there. there was didn't always necessarily lead to a chance, but there was still moments where Celtic were threatening, and it never looked like Hibs were properly comfortable with that advantage. And as you say, it's just difficult because how do you go to Celtic Park and come up with a game plan that means you're going to come away with the 3 points? It's impossible. You just need you need more than your own team playing well and your own game plan being intelligent to even get a draw away at Celtic, and it's just that tough.
Yeah, you need them to play badly, which they didn't do here. And
one thing, Jack Iredale, and the build up to that first goal. What the fuck is he doing? Because that would have really pissed me off, because he is lightly jogging back. Now, you can say that Coud's maybe not his man, because obviously at Celtic, you played away at Celtic and you played with a back three, it becomes a back five a lot of the time, and Abita is there. But Coud's running off Abita's blind side. And not only does he not try to match the run, he doesn't even think, right, why don't I get myself into the penalty area to try and at least be another obstacle? Like I say, just a light jog back, which would really piss me off.
You talk about tiredness at the time in the game when you're kind of playing that kind of style at Celtic Park. Yeah. It's quite intense. Like, I can only assume that. But I think you obviously talked about kind of not sustainable. I think we are seeing a wee bit of a naturally expected regression with Hibs in terms of the results, because as much as they've been very good and deserve the praise they've got, you're not going to not lose games all the time. And I think they'll hopefully in the sense that I think they've deserved it, like, will do enough to get over the line, because I don't think there's really any pressure coming from anywhere behind them. But I'm laughing at Tony just now because he's absolutely adamant that this is very different to all the other teams who have a really good season once, and then immediately, like, under a new manager, and immediately plummet to finishing like 7th the next season. That this is very much going to be different. I feel we're seeing enough things to indicate that it might not be that different, and that we may see David Gray out of a job by like January or something, like, just in the same way, because I think there are little things where when the going's going well, it's like you said, there weren't really adjustments made to me in this game once you realise Celtic were taking you apart. But at the same time, you can afford that, and I hope I'm wrong, because I do like Gray as a guy and whatever, but it'll be interesting to see how quickly it takes to turn if the season doesn't start that well, which I think it won't, because they're in Europe.
Yep.
But it's interesting. But as I say, I hope they do hang on for further. I don't see any way they don't, to be honest, with the fixtures coming up.
Now.
I think they could lose both games, and I don't think it would matter.
Yeah, because we'll get to the flaws with the team that's the only team likely of catching them now at this point, and I cannot see it happening at all. I think Hibs very much have third wrapped up now after the results this past weekend. But very briefly to mention, when we talk about the next game, Rangers game, what we're going to say about Rangers also applies to Celtic. So just in case any Rangers fans take the hump when we single out you lot, just the fact that Celtic playing pretty much their full strength team at this game, at this point of the season, what are you learning from that? Like, what's the point? Yeah, it's fun to win as many matches as possible, but Jesus Christ, how much money must they spend on youth players and their academy and stuff, and to not like give anybody, just somebody, a bloody start out of nowhere? Like, what's
Sean
the point?
McArdle got 5 minutes, so he's apparently from the Killie youth system as well. So not even and Kenny the same, who's the other young player they brought on, not actually out their own academy at all.
So yeah, but I'll talk about that a lot more when we get to Rangers soon enough. But the other thing, Hibs, Boyle was very good in attack, not only in terms of he's been the kind of main threat for Hibs, but there was a couple of times as well he even managed to make the ball stick with either his technique or just kind of his experience now. And he talked after the game that there's an option in his deal, a club option for another season, and he says he's just waiting for Hibs to pick it up or to tell him that they're not going to do it, and he's just kind of waiting around. I've seen Hibs fans say it's a no-brainer. On the surface, yeah, pretty much. He's had an excellent season since he's now pretty much an out-and-out forward. I think that suits him as he's kind of, the older he gets, obviously his pace will recede, and you can see that he's still very quick, but he's not quite as rapid as he once was. But he's got a little extra kind of street smarts, bit of guile now. He's obviously a good finisher, and him being a forward, I think will suit him as his kind of career winds down, and he can get a bit more longevity out of it, having been seen as a winger and even sometimes a wing back for a lot of his career. But it's not a no-brainer because, I mean, nobody knows exactly what he's on, but the talk is that it's at least 10 grand a week.
It'll be a lot because they had to bring him back from Saudi, like from the whole reason. Nobody is going to Saudi Arabia for the lifestyle. So the only reason he goes there in the first place is to make, career-defining, life-defining money. And he's come back after less than a year, which, I mean, a lot of people will, because I imagine it's quite an unpleasant place to live. But he will be on a lot of money. And I can agree with you. I think they should keep him around because he, I talked about it in that other pod that we did. There's actually not a lot of continuity with Hibs in the squad anymore. There's not a lot of guys that have been there for any length of time. And he's obviously one of the ones that kind of knows the club and all that type of stuff, which I do think is important. But they maybe try to get less money out of him, get him a small. Because I don't think there's another team. I mean, maybe Aberdeen, because there's always chat with Aberdeen, but I don't think there's another team that would be taking him up on the Hibs money.
Aye, if Ian Gordon is still willing to write off whatever debt that Hibs accrue over the course of a campaign, then I get it's a bit of a no-brainer, because especially with his kind of track record, I know he's not really the head of recruitment anymore, but Hibs can easily take that money and spend it on 2 or 3 players and they'll all end up being absolute shite. So you may as well keep somebody you know is very likely to be good next season. However, you're also got to, if he's wanting to make them sustainable, and you've got to think that's the hope. I suppose it depends on whether he wants to start doing that next season, but if he wants to make them sustainable and profitable, then you do have to wonder whether you're going to give a 32-year-old, even on a 1-year deal, a contract that's that big. I wonder if he's waiting until it's confirmed that they're in European football next season in terms of the group stages, which will be after the Scottish Cup final. And I wouldn't be surprised if you see a new contract for Boyle announced like 3 days after that. Right, final game took place on Sunday. Sky Sports cameras. Aberdeen 4, that's all right. Rangers 4, Aberdeen 0. It was 0-0 at half-time, bit of a crap first half. Aberdeen started the second half at best spell of the game, but then Rangers opened the scoring through Vaclav Černý, and from that, the ceiling just caved in on the Dons. Cyril Dessers, Hamza Egeman and Jefte getting the goals in a 4-0 rout for the home side. Barry Ferguson's first clean sheet as Rangers boss, first win at Ibrox, and first time they've pumped anybody. And Aberdeen, like, that is now, I think it was, I saw over the last 25 games. 25 games. That's a lot of football. They have the worst record in the entire league. And to be the first team to hand Barry Ferguson the 3 things that I mentioned, yeah, he was probably going to get a win at Ibrox eventually. Yeah, he's probably going to keep a clean sheet eventually. But to get pumped and for all those things to happen in what was a really pathetic second half performance once they went a goal down as well. I mean, I'm interested to get your thoughts. I'm going to talk about Tallinn a little bit more in a second, but what's your kind of take on it first of all?
I thought the defending on both sides was really, really poor in this game. Right. I think Aberdeen, you said Rangers kept a clean sheet. I don't quite know how, because some of the opportunities they passed up, like they must have 3 or 4 times given the ball to Aberdeen like 30 yards from goal. And just like Aberdeen, it was a mix of poor finishing and to be fair, I think Liam Killie, it wasn't any saves that you wouldn't expect him to make, but he did make a couple of good ones. Aberdeen, I think they've signed quite a few duds and they've spent a heck of a lot of money on this squad. But Ockles again off at half-time, the Bag again off at half-time. I mean, again, the Bag scores the winner in the Scottish Cup semi, and maybe that's enough in terms of like justifying his existence, even if it's a tap-in. The 2 centre-halves...
A tap-in against 9 men.
Yeah. The 2 centre-halves, I am not at all convinced by either of them. I think Noster looks the part, like, but he just kind of gets the run around quite a lot. And I think you saw from Tober's like a bit of... I don't know. To me, it just doesn't look like he's cut out for this level, like this style of football and stuff like that. So there was a lot going on there, and then you've got fullbacks in terms of Shinnie. I don't think he can play there anymore, and I think Devlin's out of form. So there's just a lot going on in that squad that seems to not be working out. And when you're going to the bench, like at least I've got Nisbet who has been scoring goals, but apart from that, when you go to the bench, it's not like they're bringing on quality. They're bringing on, like Jensen, you can maybe say has probably got a bit about him. They're bringing on guys who are like peripheral figures or guys who have got something they can do, but they're, for the amount of money that's been spent, I would say on that squad, I would be worried, even though they are probably going to qualify for Europe. So I feel like you can understand why it can be seen as a good season in the context of last season and in the context of the start they had, but I feel like you've got more questions than answers about Aberdeen coming out of the season, which is a strange thing to say.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was going to get to, because I've still seen some Aberdeen fans over this weekend say like Jimmy Tilleen, he's not got the players to make his system work. He's not a miracle worker. Those were two things I've seen. I was like, there is still a cult of Tilleen that's, I mean, you'd get more Aberdeen fans questioning him now and thinking that not maybe as capable hands as I thought earlier in the season. But obviously, so many people really bought into that beginning to the campaign. And I was on record all along saying they deserve more credit than I thought some people were giving them. A lot of people were saying they were lucky due at the start. I thought they did very well at the beginning of that campaign to get as many victories as they did, because you can have like Killie, St Mirren, Hearts all going to Pittodrie after European games. You can have the kind of the Premier Sports Cup to get yourselves up to speed and to get yourselves a bit of momentum going at the campaign. You can start away at St Johnstone, who are absolutely like a shambles kind of coming out of the summer. But there's often cases in Scottish football of teams kind of similar stature to Aberdeen having kind of things break for them and not getting that many victories, because it's just kind of hard to do that many games in a row. So they did deserve credit for that. Ever since then, though, Jesus, things have kind of a lot more negative than positive. And a year into almost a year into the job, you cannot, after 2 transfer windows, you can't tell me that Jimmy Tilleen doesn't have the players to play a system. And if he does, that means he's been signing the wrong players. And he's been, as you say, he's been backed well financially to bring these guys in. And the other one as well, saying like he's not a miracle worker. I'm sorry, like I've seen many managers in Scottish football come into their first job at a club of the size of Hibs and Hearts, taking over a bit of a shambles and finishing third. Finishing third in the Scottish Premiership, especially after the start of the season they had. There is no miracles to be worked there. Aberdeen should be finishing third this season, and they're not. And the reason why they're not, as you say, should have a lot of question marks going into the next campaign. I'm not saying like, I'm definitely not saying anything like they should, like to lean out or anything anywhere near close to that, because that would be ridiculous. But yeah, I don't know. I would be a bit worried if I was a Dodds fan.
And like over half the team that played there come in since he took over. So it's like, and there are other signings of his on the bench if he really wanted to pick them ahead of the other one. So I think it is his team at this point. For Rangers, there's a lot to talk about. Nicholas Raskin having another excellent game. Czerny popping up. I think less like he's much more of a moments guy, but he has the moments. But I don't think we learn a lot, and I think it maybe goes on to the point that I think you're about to make about them, in terms of like there are players on that park. You're questioning why are they on that park at this point in the season when there's nothing to play for.
Yeah, that was the thing. That was kind of what caught me from the game. And then Josh Barry for the Rangers Review wrote a good article on it. Like, what was the kind of point? Like, yes, victories must come first and blah blah, but it very much seemed like short termism, and that's the downside from hiring a interim manager, because that was the kind of thing that was maybe lost in the shuffle of all this, is why hire an interim manager who's definitely not going to be on the staff next season? Because what are you actually doing? Like, and especially bringing in Barry Ferguson. See, because they were still in Europe, and because they're always great in Europe, like, if you wanted to hire an interim manager to focus on Europe, then bring in somebody, you would bring in somebody that's got like more of a track record of doing well. Like an old coach who like can't be arsed about, like, okay, I'll take them for the rest of the season. I'll see how far I can get in Europe and maybe do you well in Old Firm games. And that has kind of happened to an extent with Ferguson. But it's like, why bring in somebody who is undeniably not going to be in the staff? Like, he's not going to be in the Rangers staff next season, purely for the reason that if the new manager coming in has a bad start, then you are going to get people led by kind of many members of the media in this country saying, well, what about Barry Ferguson? Should he get the job on a full-time basis? And then that'll just create this distraction. But Ferguson's obviously doing what's best for Ferguson at this point in time, because he knows he's going to be out of a job at the end of the season. He knows they're not going to hire him on a full-time basis. But the best job he does is more likelihood of him either getting an opportunity again at Rangers of Future or getting another opportunity elsewhere.
Not in Scotland, where the context of Alloa and Kiltie Hearts is and Clyde is not there.
So he only cares about his managerial win percentage at Rangers, but he doesn't care about, like he said after the match that Bailey Rice isn't ready yet to start games consistently. Well, this is the point in the campaign where you do start, because if you lose, does it fucking matter? You're undeniably finishing second place, but it matters to Ferguson, and that's the problem with Rangers with this team. Yeah, they got a good victory, it boosts morale in a season with them not had many good things to shout about. It is against Aberdeen, so there is a kind of extra get it up you to your opposition. That matters as well, but like even Iggy Man not starting at this point in the season, he's clearly good as well. But it's Dessers playing every week up front instead. We know what Dessers is about. There's nothing to learn there. It's just, it's not something that's going to help Rangers out in the long term. But they put in a good second half performance and pumped Aberdeen, so they can at least be happy with that. Right, I think that'll do us.
Yep,
that'll do us. Craig, thank you very much for joining me.
Very welcome.
And thank you to everybody for listening. I was going to say, in your continued support of the podcast, that's usually my Patreon sign-off. But if you would like to support the podcast more, the best way to do so is to do so on patreon.com/Terrace Podcast, where there is hours and hours of bonus content from as little as £2 a month. And Craig, we should probably plug our quiz, which is taking place on the 3rd of June at the West Nile Street Innocent Gun Tap Room, with a 6 p.m. start for the quiz kicking off at 7. And Craig, anything else you'd like to tell the people about the quiz itself?
No, I mean, I've been every single time I'm out and an idea pops into my head, it's in a little Google Notes document or a Samsung Notes document on my phone, getting made into a big quiz. I think that it will be quite a varied quiz. There's kind of multimedia, hopefully some video, some audio, some standard questions, and I think it'll be a lot of fun. That there are prizes there. There will be the opportunity for people to take part in a charity auction in order to get some brains you would want on your team, and maybe some that would just be bringing the entertainment value. But you can pick and choose who's in which category. So I think it'll be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to it, and it'll be a good chance to kind of test yourself against other podcast listeners, and we've hopefully kind of got guests from a couple of other podcasts that you've heard featured on here, like people or guests, like teams from those podcasts as well. So
we've got some journalists coming as well. There's 2 tables confirmed from one newspaper. I think we're getting another. I think it's maybe a broadcaster's got a table as well. We're not. I don't know if that's been booked in yet, but we're hopeful of that happening as well. So yeah, some well Kent faces about the place.
Yes, to prove yourself, prove your knowledge, and yeah, I think it'll be good fun, and hopefully it is, because if it goes well, we'll hopefully do more of them. But
yes, I will certainly do more of them.
It will only do well and have more of them if we sell all the tickets. So don't wait for the next one, because there might not be a next one if you wait too long.
But tickets are going, so I'm pretty positive for the speed that the tickets have gone for a quiz and not like a live show, because obviously you have to. There's more kind of talking to people and getting a team together and making sure that everybody can get there on the night and stuff. And as I said on the advert released on the main feed a couple of days ago, if you're somebody that wants to come but you don't have anybody to come with, then give us a shout and we'll try and make sure that. We will make sure that you're on a team and you're not just a team of one.
Yep. But yeah, I think you're right. I think from Tony's update, he's very excited updates so far. We will probably sell this out. So if you are thinking about going, don't hang about too long.
Yes. So I'll put a link to where you buy the tickets in the podcast description. So if you are interested, then please do that. But that'll do us. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you again soon. Goodbye.
Bye.